The way that a company responds to immigration enforcement activities can have real world consequences. If you don't have that documentation in order, what will happen is the employer will face fines. What it's going to signal to your employees is that you care about their safety in the workplace and that you're putting in plans in their interest as well as the interest of the organization. There are very clear rights that the employer has in their workplace where they don't have to allow the public to come into private workspaces. I think what we're seeing in this day and age is that enforcement actions related to immigration can happen with little to no notice. And company responds to immigration enforcement activities can have real world consequences, legal, operational, reputational consequences. And so having a thought out response plan in advance can really protect both the business as well as its workforce. And keep in mind too, when immigration might show up at the door of your workplace, and that can be quite intimidating, and tensions run high, and having a good thought out plan when tensions are not running high and employees are not stressed is a general best practice, so that you just have your plan in place. You've got your script, you know what to do and what not to say, as well as what to say, training your employees on all that. It's really important to have that in advance. With immigration enforcement, historically what we've seen is that it starts with the I-9 audit first versus an ICE visit. Now, things are changing every day, and that's certainly not a hard and fast rule. But generally, with an I-9 audit, the employer is served a notice with about 3 days to be able to respond, meaning ICE will come back and review the documentation that says that your employees are authorized to work in the US. And so 3 days is not a lot of time, particularly if you have a large workforce, to get all of that documentation in order. So if you don't have that documentation in order, what will happen is generally the employer will face fines. They may have disruption to their operations because employees will have to scramble to then, obviously come forward with their employment authorization documentation. And there's a lot of liability for non-compliance. What ICE looks for is they really want to see, are you making a good faith effort to rectify these things and follow the law? So what will happen is if you're not in compliance, they typically will visit again and again until they feel satisfied that you are in compliance. As those repeat visits go on, the fines do increase. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of it in a timely manner. Certainly for, if you're caught off guard for an ICE visit, that can have very serious repercussions because there are certain things that ICE can and cannot do in the workplace. There are certain areas that they can and cannot visit, meaning public versus private parts of the workplace. There's a certain type of warrant they need to present if they're going to go into a private space. That would be a judicial warrant, meaning a warrant signed by a judge. And so most of typically what we see at employers is the frontline staff and even the managers of team members, they generally don't know the differences of these different, aspects. What is a warrant? What is a judicial warrant? What is private versus public space? And so what happens is an employer may allow ICE to enter an area that they otherwise shouldn't have access to. And then further allow them to have access to their workforce and further allow the ICE individuals to interview their workforce. And that can really lead to some serious repercussions like detainment. And that is something that we see, seen in the news, certainly this year. So having a plan in place can really help mitigate a lot of that. A major part of an immigration enforcement response plan is training. Granted, you want to have, a plan for how you're going to react in certain situations, but if that plan just sits on someone's desk, on a shelf, or what have you, it really doesn't carry much value. So you absolutely want to train your employees on it. You want to train particularly anyone that might be the first interface for someone coming into the public space, your receptionists, maybe even if you have a security guard at your workplace, certainly, a team manager, something like that. Those sorts of roles should be trained on this. And it's a good practice to train all of your employees on this, because it's what it's going to signal to your employees is that you care about their safety in the workplace, and that you're putting in plans in their interest as well as the interest of the organization. For immigration enforcement response planning, reviewing any plans annually is a best practice. I think also under the current administration, I think it's really important to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the news and what's happening, at the federal level, because things are shifting. And so reviewing it with some regularity, maybe during this first year of the Trump administration, reviewing it quarterly probably would be a good practice, but certainly at least annually. When it comes to immigration enforcement visits, I think a common misconception is, there's somebody showing up at your door. Oftentimes they're in a uniform. They may not be, but oftentimes they are. And I think there is a misconception that you need to follow everything that they're asking for and do exactly what they say. But the reality is that there are very clear rights that the employer has in their workplace, where they don't have to allow the public to come into private workspaces unless they have a judicial warrant. And that's a warrant that's signed by a judge. And so I think there is this misconception that ICE shows up at the door, you need to answer all their questions, you need to give them access, you need to hand over documentation. And that's just not the reality. You really should be, taking in what information they're asking for, and giving a response after talking likely to either your HR department, an HR consultant, or your immigration attorney. People 415, we help clients with building a tailored response plan for immigration enforcement. We have a toolkit. Certainly an employer can customize it themselves, but we do offer services where we'll work alongside the employer to help understand their workforce and what certain risks might exist in their workplace. A big part of, again, you want to have a plan in place, but you want to train your employees on their legal rights, any procedures that you've established in the plan. And so that is a big part of the work that we do, is helping the employer train their team. Additionally, conducting like an internal audit or a mock audit where we might take a sampling of the employer's I-9s. Those are those forms that verify that an employee can work in the United States. We want to ensure that their I-9 forms are in compliance and that it's airtight, because if there is an external I-9 audit, ICE will come in and look at that documentation. So we want to make sure those forms are filled out completely. There's the right documentation. If you're collecting the documentation, they're signed in a timely manner. They're being verified within 3 days that an employee starts. And so we have a toolkit geared to cover all of that information, as well as, if enforcement does come in, vis-a-vis like a raid. We have sample communication templates and other assets, so you're just ready to go at a moment's notice. It's really important to designate a company representative or your organization representative, who's going to respond to any sort of enforcement activity, and make sure that they have a clear understanding of what those written protocols are. Like, how will you respond if someone comes into the workplace, what you should and shouldn't say, if ICE should arrive, and then how you're going to handle that. I think having someone that really champions the response plan and how to respond to enforcement activities is critical, because just having that first step in place is going to help with, dictating the rest of the activities, and it really can help reduce panic, liability, the concern that your workforce likely has over this issue.